Nice to show at home, huh?
Absolutely. It's great. I actually, my mother took me to the Young People's concerts at Avery Fisher Hall, just next door. So to come full circle and actually have something that I made screening, it's amazing.
So, a couple questions. One is, you really think the Chinese could have messed with Rabia's flight to Nam? I mean, I saw there's this, one of the guys says they have incredible reach here, they have incredible influence. Is that a possibility? Would that actually happen?
I think it's something in making this film that surprised me is actually the reach that the Chinese government has towards Chinese visitors, Chinese students. They tell these students, as I guess we would to some degree, you are a representative of your country. But then they go further and say, you need to keep your ears open. You need to make sure that your fellow students or other people are behaving themselves, and if you notice anything suspicious, you know who to tell about that. So I think we've also been finding a large degree of Chinese spies in Australia. They found that up to 1,000 Chinese people who are living there, recent people and students, act as spies for the government. Same thing is happening here as well. Now, I speak to Uyghur people and say, does this exist? And they say, of course it does. I get viruses on my computer all the time. So, I mean, there's a degree of paranoia there, but I'm sure you can understand where that paranoia is coming from when you undergo such severe, strict rules and attention from the Chinese government. As a Uyghur person living in Western China, who can blame them for thinking such thoughts?
And the situation, the Uyghur situation, since you finished the film, has gone in which direction?
I think it's gone south to a further degree. I think it's worsened. After the Olympics, that was the beginning of the latest crackdowns on Uyghur activity. It's incredible how an incredible confluence of coincidences that 5 days before the international premiere of my film in Melbourne, Australia, peaceful protests, which became violent after a severe military crackdown of protests which are not allowed in China, caused violence that resulted in the death of 200 people, most of them Han Chinese people. So immediately the government said this is a terrorist attack, and who masterminded it but Rebbe Kadir. And where's Rebbe Kadir now? She's attending a film festival in Melbourne, Australia, about a film that's been made for her, made about her. So the Chinese government made a real stink about that, and since then, this has been one of the worst disasters in China's history. 200 people dead. So there was a severe crackdown on Uyghur people in that region. Any Uyghurs who left or who are exiles are now having great difficulty living in countries where they want to make a home and live with freedom. Countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Nepal, Central Asian countries, but even in European countries such as Germany and the Netherlands. In the Netherlands recently, there have been a number of Uyghurs who are exiles who they simply don't believe in the way that they're being treated, and will not grant them, the way that they're being treated by the Chinese government, they won't grant them asylum, and they're going to send them back home. And they don't believe that by sending them back home, they risk imprisonment, if not execution. China is one of the only countries that executes people for political crimes, meaning not agreeing with the government, and China actually executes more people than any other country in the world combined. So it's a very difficult time for the Uyghur at the moment. It has not improved for them.
Quickly, can you just tell me what happened with the with your film, with Melbourne Film Festival? I kind of butchered that, but explain what happened and what went down.
It was an interesting experience. My father was there, luckily, to see it. The first screening, I think when the Chinese government found out that this film was going to be screened, you have to understand, Rebbe Kadir, according to the Chinese government, is the Osama bin Laden of China. So in China, when most of the information you get is from the government, if not the primary source, you're of course going to believe what they're saying. So I think that there were about 80,000 people who hacked into the website of the film festival to try and prevent it from becoming active. They posted their own propaganda up on the screen, and they found that 80,000 of these hackers were all from China. So, you know, of course the Chinese people are going to believe what they're told in that regard, and they'll be very angry about it. They actually also tried to, I think there were death threats to the festival organizers. They sent pictures of dead kangaroos on the street. There was also an attempt to try and book as many tickets and hold them for my screening so that it would appear like the screening was already sold out, basically, but it was on them because it already had been sold out. So, hey, there you go.
Take that.
Yeah, it actually ended up screening. They had to move the screening from a theater much like this to the Melbourne Town Hall, which seats 2,000 people, and that sold out in about 5 hours. So, I mean, hey, thank God for the Chinese government, you know? It's
your best publicist.
I couldn't ever get, that's for sure.
Yeah, I saw a hand go up somewhere right over here. Wiley, you get there?
Thank you for making this wonderful film.
Thank
I
you.
wanted to know, what's the Obama administration's attitude toward it on this issue?
I think any presidential administration, I think their opinion of what's going on in terms of their support for someone like Rebbe Kadir and many other people from underrepresented countries who undergo you know, a similar plight, it depends on their relationship with the country at that moment. So the first half of Bush's administration, he was all for China. He needed their support with the war on terror, as well as for other reasons. They carry a large chunk of our debt, and they still do. Towards the end of his administration, he felt that he was in a better position to start speaking about their human rights. The Obama administration comes from this standpoint of representing and giving voice to people who you know, who suffer the same plight as the Uyghur do, but I feel that at this moment a relationship with China is very important to the United States during these difficult financial times. So while if you were to ask Obama at a party how he feels, and he saw no reporters around, I'm sure he would be very supportive of Rebbe Kadir. I'd like to see more of that stated in public.
What are your plans? Are there plans to make this a full feature-length film, or is it more targeted TV? And excuse me, your assistant here. So, are there plans to make this more of a full-length feature? And what would you include in it if that were to be the case, or do you hope to get it on the television?
The film I wanted to make was a film that was a lot slower. Maybe an hour and a half. I think looking more at the story of Rebbe Kadir and her daughter would have complemented the film well. That's really the story I like to tell, more observational films, less voiceover. You know, that's really what I like to do. Unfortunately, the second I'd mentioned China, human rights abuses, Muslim woman, broadcasters would back away. So I received no funding for this film in terms of production. I financed it with a small amount of help from the Film Board of Australia, Screen Australia and Film Victoria, but the vast majority of it was myself. I filmed everything up there. This is the first film I've ever made.
From all your time as a school teacher?
Yeah, that's right. I worked as a school teacher in Australia.
So just lots of money just laying around.
Yeah. Well, luckily in Australia, they give you a lot of time they give you breaks so that I'd have 2 weeks every 3 months to go to China and film, to go to Washington and New York and film. So I just use whatever money I get to continue this film. It meant a great deal to me. The amount of money and time and people who truly believed in this film, the amount of time they put into it can only give me about an hour, a TV hour's length. And there was a bit of a strategy there. I felt if I can't pre-sell it to broadcasters, maybe I can sell it as a finished product, and they usually take hour-length films anyway. You know, it seems that it's actually now been screened at over 40 film festivals and venues around the world, and who actually required a feature-length, more of a feature-length version. So, you know, but unfortunately I just didn't have the money for that. But I'm very happy that it's been able to screen in Melbourne, in Indonesia, South Korea, Taiwan, where it caused a great deal of distress for, for the Taiwanese with the Chinese government, in the EU Parliament, U.S. Congress, and now here in New York. So I feel I've done my best with what I had.
All the way back, Wiley? Can you run to the back to your sister there? Run, and there we are.
What's your personal connection with this story? And on another note, what is happening with her children right now?
Yes, to answer what's happened to her children now, they are currently, her two sons are still in prison, serving 7- and 9-year sentences. They were put in prison because Rabi Kadir was speaking out, so I'm sure you can guess when they'll be let out. I don't see Rabi Kadir quieting down anytime soon. So it's a very unfortunate situation for her sons, and I'm very glad to see representatives of Amnesty International here with sheets where you can add your name as a voice to protest and say that this is wrong, this imprisonment of Rabi Kadir's children, if you've made up your mind to do so. That's really where a difference is made, I feel. Personally, I was here during September 11th with my family, and I knew of a few, I have family members who are here who were in the towers, and family friends who died as well. It was an extremely difficult time, and I think everyone was feeling very vulnerable during that time, and I personally was ready to believe almost anything I was reading. My ability to question what I was reading in newspapers was not like it used to be at that moment, because my emotions were taking over. So when I heard that the New York Times says China thinks Osama bin Laden may be in Western China with the Uyghur people because they're so militant, I believed it. I didn't question it. And it was only later when I met a friend who introduced me to Uyghur students he was teaching in Beijing that I allowed myself to hear a different story, hear from the Uyghur, from themselves instead of from the Chinese government. And I kicked myself for not seeing that other side. I couldn't believe that I wouldn't look at the other side of the story to try and make a better decision. And who else is doing this? I needed to find out the other voice for the Uyghur people. I wanted to do whatever I could to put that into a film so that people who aren't otherwise interested in politics or interested in unrepresented peoples of the world, and there are many of them that we're not aware of, it's something to at least let people know that they exist, so that there's a bit of that in their consciousness and their conscience, really, to do something about it. So that really is, I guess, my personal connection to it. It was a real passion to tell the story of this underrepresented or completely unrepresented people. I hope that through screenings like this, a bit of a difference is made. The fact that you guys are now aware that they exist is, I think, a success for me. I feel good about that.
Matthew? Right on. Kitty, right here.
What's the position of the movement about the detainees at Guantanamo, and what has happened to those folks? And is there any evidence they were ever engaged in anything?
I wish I could have made a film about the Uyghur in Guantanamo Bay. They were actually the first prisoners to be released from Guantanamo Bay because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I think that the connection from information that I found from independent sources, government sources, about why the Uyghur were captured in, I think this was Afghanistan. There were a number of Uyghur militants who were part of the East Turkestan Army in the 1940s, who would continue to fight with help from the British Army, the American Army, however much you want to, however much they're willing to admit that. But they helped out the Uyghur, they helped out Tibetans to run as much of a sort of guerrilla rebellion against Chinese rule. And a number of those people, when they found that the Chinese government was cracking down too hard on them, they went further west to Afghanistan. And it was there that they ended up receiving help, actually, again, from American sources, to train the Taliban to fight the Russian army. A number of them were there for years and made that their home. And then, who are they? They are people with a militant history who helped the Taliban and who were still living in this area at that time when the American troops came in. Now, as I said before, these Uyghur people who were captured in Guantanamo were the first people to be released because they found basically nothing for them, nothing on them, and they also found that there was nowhere to put them. And it would be very embarrassing for the Bush administration to allow these Uyghur people to live in the United States. These were convicted terrorists who were now living in the United States. Where else can we put them? We can't bring them back to China. That would have their certain incarceration, if not death. So they're actually now living in a very small island, I think in Palau, outside of Australia, with the hope that eventually they'll be able to move to Australia, and it hasn't happened yet.
They'd been sent to Bermuda, or did they transit through Bermuda?
Yeah, they went all over to a number of very different small islands that, you know, yeah, where they would certainly be sticking out. And the last I heard from them, they were very unhappy being in a place so far away from anything they recognize.
Well, that line that one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist certainly applies here. Have you felt personally, I mean, if you tried to go to China, would that be an issue? Do you think? I mean, how do you feel? Do you feel you're being watched?
Well, I mean, honestly, during the filming of this production, when I was in China, I was watched. There may be a friend of mine here, or not a friend, who was here helping me.
Wait.
When I was in China. No. There is a person who lives in the city, let me say, who helped me. This person spoke Mandarin, so just happened to be in China when I was filming, to act as a translator. So almost every day that we were there, there was somebody, a policeman, plainclothes policeman, someone claiming to be police, stopping us, asking what we were shooting, and we had to change tapes. We had a whole system. So they were looking at us. They were watching us. After that, watching me, perhaps through email. I've had to change email addresses a few times. I've had a few complications. But honestly, no. I mean, it really hasn't been dangerous outside of the country. I've been told by a number of journalists, you'll never be allowed in China again. They speak from experience. They've written articles in newspapers that speak against the Chinese government or that speak in certain things that they've found that the Chinese government doesn't agree with, and so they're put on a list and they're never allowed back in the country. And they said that is certainly the case for you. I probably wouldn't be allowed to go past the visa process to get into the country.
It seems to me, just reading the paper, that the human rights situation in China is incredibly complicated right now. You have Tibetan monks setting themselves on fire. And personally, I always, when I'm explaining this film, I say the Uyghurs are kind of like Tibet, except not famous, with the Dalai Lama and Richard Gere and all of that. There's just no, but they're a very similar story, right?
They're a similar story. They're both people whose homelands were peacefully liberated by the Chinese army, and unfortunately for the Uyghur, they don't have the same. I think. I mean, the Dalai Lama. He represents Buddhism. Buddhism seems to represent to us in popular culture as a religion of true peace and oneness. And the second you say Islam or Muslim, unfortunately, as I say in this film, there are negative connotations to that. So when you hear Muslim, freedom fighter versus Buddhist freedom fighter, you have to double. You have to kind of take a double take, unfortunately. And America's been taking a very long double take for the Uyghur people. They've given them great support, but I think the Western world, unfortunately, has a great deal of trouble accepting a Muslim person who disagrees with their government as being as easy to follow as the Dalai Lama. So Rebbe Kadir's had an uphill battle for her entire life, unfortunately.
It seems too that just from a human rights standpoint, China's concerned about the Arab Spring, they're concerned about Occupy Wall Street, they don't want this on their doorstep. They have the artist IE, which I hope I pronounced right, there's the blind attorney, I knew I'd blow it. The blind lawyer, they've really got issues that they're concerned about. It seems like their tactic is not to go subtly with this. But I wonder if that's changing.
It's not, and I don't think it is changing. I questioned why the Chinese government would make such a stink about my film, which would have received a decent following with my friends and family, and with the Uyghur community. I would have been very proud of it. Amnesty International, accepted into their film festival in Holland. That was great. But I think why did they make such a stink to give me press all over the world for this one screening of this film I worked on myself? It was the fact that they simply refused to allow an event like this to go without a mention to their own people. The Chinese government cares more about what its people sees of them than of what we're imperialist pigs. That's what we are to them. They don't care what we think. They care what their own people think. And according to the Chinese government, they stood up for their people by slamming my film and putting it down. And if it gets press, great. Let's hear what they have to say. And then do our best to say, oh, well, these are all lies. This is what the imperialist West always does. They lie because they can't see the truth. So, unfortunately, I think this is just the way that they are going to go. Anyone who speaks out against the government, they're going to, as an example, go down very harshly on them. And these are prominent artists who are now artists and lawyers and other thinkers who are doing their best to connect with the outside world, with the rest of us, so that we'll take notice of them when they're missing for a few months without anyone hearing from them. And I hope we continue to do that.
Well, I think Can we take one last question? Matthew, Wiley, get on it, brother. There you go.
David, if I could give you a suitcase of money that would make your film festival everything you hoped for, and if I could give you a suitcase of money so you could make your next film, but you found out that it was blood money, that it came at the cost of human rights sufferings and the murder of untold numbers of people, would you take the money? And if not, why would America continue to do business with China?
Jeff, I'm going to let you handle that one. I'd sell out and sell out.
I think that's it. That's the question. Why do we continue to do business with a country like this that treats its people in this way? We're all making these choices, and sometimes we're not aware of them with the products that we buy and the people who we vote for. I think it's amazing how much we are all involved in this story about a people who we've never heard of, so that some of you may never have heard of before watching this film. You are involved in the process of how these people are being treated by supporting a government that continues to treat its people, and not just the Uyghur, but all people in China, to this degree, and to varying degrees in this way, by denying them basic human rights that we all take for granted. So I don't know if I'm answering this question correctly, but I think it's extremely important for us all to be very much aware of what decisions we make, because this is what happens. This is how those decisions come through. If you don't think you're one person, what difference can I make? Well, being complicit with a country that does this to its people, that's something that you should all be very well aware of. And I hope that comes through. I hope you tell other people about, about this, if not this film, about, how you can be so easily complicit with countries that treat their people so unfairly, denying them this basic human right to life.
Before you said that was the last question, and I want to thank you very much. But I really want to take this opportunity, David, You've been educating me Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I never would have had such an opportunity. So I want to thank you for all the hard work.
I want to thank you all for coming out. I want to thank Judith Selby Lang, whose wonderful photos are up front, who was in the film One Plastic Beach. I want to thank Ben Stooksbury, whose film Kadoma was here. There was somebody, FK Day from World Bike Relief. I want to thank you for being here. Matthew Modine, thank you for coming out. It's been a great weekend. It's really been a pleasure to have all these terrific people. Jeff Daniels, you're awesome.
Thank you.